All right, thanks to those who are joining us early this morning. Again, we'll give it another couple of minutes for any additional participants to join. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A or in the chat. If we don't get to them as we go along, we'll be sure to address them at the end of the presentation. All right, as we wait for the last participants to trickle in, I will go ahead and get started. Good morning, everybody. My name is Sierra Orr. I'm with the City of Big Bear Lake Department of Water and Public Information and Conservation. Thank you guys all for joining us today. Today is going to be the fourth of our 9-part webinar series. If you were with us last week, we did have to cancel and reschedule that one due to technical issues. So if you missed that one, or if you were registered and you didn't stay on long enough to find out what happened, we are rescheduling that one to the last Wednesday of this month. So it's not too late to sign up. Just shoot us an email, conservation@bbldwp.com. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So again, thank you for joining us for Water, Fire, and Plants, Oh My. Like I said, today is technically our 5th webinar on the schedule. Today we're going through the Art of Defensible Space with Douglas Kent. Doug is the preeminent expert, I should say, on Firewise landscaping, especially in California. He's the author of the book, quite literally the book on Firewise landscaping. He has more than 2 decades of experience, including 4 statewide gardening campaigns. These webinars, as you can see, are generally on the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Wednesday of each month, starting at 10 a.m. If you miss it, or if you have to drop off for any reason, they will be posted to our YouTube channel afterwards. So you can also find it there. The first 5 DWP customers to register and attend each series are eligible for free gifts. That includes Doug's book, as well as the books on gray water, native plants, all kinds of good stuff. We're going to determine those at the end, because some people, we don't want you to get 3 copies of the exact same book. So towards the end of these webinar series, we're actually going to sort all of that out, and we'll get everybody's names and contact you and let you know what you've won and get those out to you. These are especially tailored to our Big Bear Valley residents, business owners, property owners. And like I said, you can always email conservation@bbldwp.com to sign up for the rest. We still have 3 additional webinars in September, as well as 2 remaining for this month. You've got our office number there if you need it. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A panel. You can also use the chat panel. If I hear Doug answer your question as we go, I'll go ahead and type the answer in there so that you have that to refer back to. If he doesn't answer it during the presentation, we're going to go over any of those unanswered questions at the end. And if it's one of those things that's just much easier to explain by talking to somebody, just go ahead and raise your hand at the end and we will unmute you and you'll be allowed to talk during the presentation. But stop my screen share and we are going to hand it back over to Doug. Thank you guys again for joining us and we'll get started.
Good morning, Sierra and everybody. So grateful to be here today. While this thing is loading up, I would, usual, I really like to take the opportunity to acknowledge the unique person that shows up today. California is going to burn. It has been burning for thousands of years. It will continue to burn for thousands of years. And it doesn't mean it has to burn urban areas or urbanized areas or private property. And the people that showed up today actually acknowledge that. And they're willing to take a stand and eradicate fire from urban infrastructure. And so I just like to acknowledge your courage, your fortitude, and your willingness to get educated and educate others. So thank you so much for inviting me into your community and being a part of group of people. Thanks. All right, we've got 38 slides today, and this is all about defensible space. And I'm just going to reiterate what we covered 1 month ago. You didn't have to show up to that presentation to make this presentation work, but we did cover the absolute essentials of fire protection. And that was roads, making sure you had two-way lanes and two-way traffic, and that you had ample forward visibility and manage those overhanging branches so a fire wouldn't be transmitted across the road. We talked about the fundamental importance of fire-hardened structures. Really, that's probably 50% of your protection is creating a home that can withstand those firebrands and intense heat. And then the 5 feet, just how important just managing the 5 feet around your house is. And defensible space and the art of it is really today's lesson. So today, just in this 60 minutes, I'm going to be covering pathways and their importance, structures and fences. So that would be outbuildings and shade structures. Talk about trees and spacing of trees, and then the role of plants and fire protection, which is everybody loves that one. So let's get going. I am just going to back up and just define defensible space right now. So defensible space really evolves around the zone theory. And the zone theory is just 3 concentric zones around any structure, business or residence. And the first 30 feet is meant to endure and to protect. So it's going to absorb all those firebrands that are coming from those wind-generated the firebrands that are propelled ahead of the fire because of the Santa Anas and the heavy winds that are produced during fire weather. Zone 2, which is about 31 feet to 70 feet out, this is where a fire is actively stopped. So the flames get close 30 feet. And then further out, 71 feet to 100 feet or 200 feet, depending on where you live, is where you slow the fire. So we're bringing down its intensity. We're changing the fire behavior. And the picture in the bottom left illustrates what CAL FIRE thinks is the fantastic zone theory. Great driveway, great access, good paths. Zone 1 is green, zone 2 is brown, and zone 3, you can see that they actively slowed the fire and were able to get water on it. But my presentations really focus on the first 30 feet. Statistically, if we have a fire-hardened structure and just 30 feet of defensible space, you have a 90% chance of survival. I mean, that's the essentials, the structure in the 30 feet. What complicates this, that I make it sound so easy, but the 30 feet is really complicated because that's where everything is. That's where we store our stuff. That's where our kids play. That's where all the junk is that we have in our life is usually within that first 30 feet. So to manage those human needs with fire protection is really the essence of this presentation today. So, and again, I really just cannot stress this enough, that first 5 feet is essential because of compression and convection. If you get a flame against a vertical surface, it compresses and elongates because of convection, and it's able to ignite a structure. And you can see this in this picture. with the pile of lumber right up against the house. It has every other winning characteristic except for the first 5 feet. So just go out there today and just check your own 5 feet, whether you're a business owner or residential property owner. So important. Okay, I'm going to start then with defensible space on emergency access, and that would be the pathways around a house. And I'm going to start with Miss Bayless from Inverness. This was the Mount Vision fire of 1903. 4 homes were destroyed on her block. She survived. I interviewed the 3 firemen that had defended her structure, and they said, more than anything, it was the pathways that allowed them to rush around the house and extinguish the fires that were being ignited by the firebrands coming down from the canopy of trees. So this was a canopy fire, much like you're going to get in Big Bear. And so the sparks and the firebrands were really coming down and raining down on these structures. And these firemen were able to just run around the structure unencumbered and quickly put out those small spot fires that those firebrands were creating. Pathways were essential to the level. So the good characteristics of a good pathway on your property, and this could be a business or a residential property, is no less than 4 feet wide. Really, you're remembering that people are running around with equipment, so you really need a wide pathway. You want a stable surface, so no roots coming up or broken concrete where there's tripping hazards. So really safe, stable. So that could be compacted earth, DG, even just a 1/2 inch of mulch would make it smooth. It doesn't have to be expensive at all. Normally, if you're on the north side of a structure where especially if you're on the north side of the structure where you really want to put a 2-degree cross slope on that to make sure that that water is already sheeting off so it doesn't create that slick spot, which is really common in some Northern California communities. You want to make sure that there's no less than 15 to 20 feet of forward visibility so those emergency responders always know what they're rushing into. And then lastly, it's just handrails for steps. So again, one hand they're going to have for their equipment, and then the other hand they're going to help and navigate their environment. So handrails would be really helpful for any kind of steps. And this is just a good example of a pathway around a structure. This is just decomposed, lightly capped, and it's a safe, stable, non-flammable surface. So this is what a good pathway would look like. It's accompanied by non-flammable materials and good plant spacing as well. So this would be an effective pathway in defensible space. Okay, structures and fences. Now this really pertains to Big Bear. When I've been up there, I've seen a lot of outbuildings and structures. So not that you have a lot of shade structures in Big Bear, but you do have a lot of structures attached to the house because of the snow and the rain. And pictured is a shade structure in Walnut, California, and this is an unpermitted structure. It's actually illegal. And the reason being is because it's attached to the house and it has those fine little slats on the top. These little slats, the actual shading device right here, is so ignitable, especially more so because it is so poorly maintained. This is a little firebrand magnet and it will ignite. And unfortunately, not only is it attached to the house, but it's underneath an overhang where those flames will ignite the rafters underneath that. This is just, this is what fire danger looks like in congested neighborhoods. So the characteristic snow structure, shade structure is house or business. You want to make sure that that hot air and those firebrands have an escape route. You'd really prefer to tilt it, as you know, in snow environments to get that snow to come off, but it actually allows convection to draw that heat and those firebrands from getting stuck underneath that shade structure. If it's flat, that heat will accumulate. But if it's tilt it a little bit, it allows convective processes to remove that heat. You also want to use oversized lumber and timber with no less than a 1 hour resistibly. Non-flammable materials would be preferred, but they tend to be a little expensive. Maybe not now because of the big price increase in lumber right now. So, and this would just be a great example of a municipal project that's shade structure or snow structure, oversized timbers, properly maintained. The smallest member they have is a 2x4, which is about the smallest type of lumber that you'd want in your landscape. In LA County, anything less than a 2x4 is actually illegal in fire country. So this is just a good example of creating your defensible space. Now, decks. Anytime you have a hillside environment, you're going to have a lot of decking and overhangs. And this is perilous because, again, when you have an overhang on a slope, those elongated fire flames can easily reach the underside of that decking. And those firebrands and that heat get held up as well. And these are just two good examples. On the picture to the upper left, you can see that the age is wood. The wood is aging. It just needs some proper maintenance. And then that dead, it looks like lemonade berry right next to that deck needs to be removed. That dead, dying, and disease vegetation around these decks. And here is just a good example of another poorly maintained decking in a hillside community. And really it just needs paint. That's all this deck needs in the bottom right is just some love and attention. And it could be fairly fire resistant. Again, the goal with these decks is to make sure that when the firebrands hit it, they hit it and just drop. There's nothing for those firebrands to stick to. So we're filling all the gaps and fissures and making sure they're well painted and maintained. This would be a really good example. This is a very high fire area in Santa Fe Hills, and they put a soffit underneath this shading structure off their back patio. And so it protected the underbelly of that roof, the rafters and the plywood. And so when those firebrands hit, and intense heat, they'll just hit it and drop, hit it and drop. And the same on the understory of this decking. They didn't put a soffit, but it has just been really well painted. And you can use almost any paint. The idea with the paint is to fill the gaps and to prevent those firebrands from sticking. Now, there are a lot of firebrands, really almost any paint will do a good job of preserving the wood and filling those gaps and fissures. Now, outbuildings, very common. The older the community, the more junk there is in the landscape, I have found. And as the community ages, you get more outbuildings. So these would be tool sheds, play sheds, as you can see in these two pictures. And here's a good example. The picture to the left, this outbuilding had many wonderful characteristics. It was well painted, well loved. All the fissures and gaps were filled. There was no flammable vegetation around the structure to directly ignite it with flames. But here's the problem with this shade structure, and this is super common. You see the gaps in the wood here in the door? Both on the top of the door and the bottom of the door would allow firebrands to penetrate the inside of the structure. And if there's anything ignitable, so this little barn has loaded with hay and feed for the horses on this property, and which can be highly ignitable. So something just quick weatherization around that door would greatly improve the chances of success. And the picture to the bottom right is just, it's just a little infernal waiting to happen. There's really nothing you can do. It is so many fine woods and fine things, is that if you do have one of these just joyful, playful structures in your property, just keep it at least 30 feet off so that if it does ignite, it doesn't gravely endanger your own home. This was just whimsy on this property, and they did it. They had it 40 feet off their house. So I kind of gave them a pass there. I think it was really fun. Legally, if you have an outbuilding on your property, legally, it has to be maintained just as your house would. So the structure itself needs to be fire hardened. So no gaps, no fissures, weatherization around the windows, non-flammable materials, good maintenance, and importantly, it needs 30 feet of clearance. So just remove that dead, dying, and diseased vegetation around these outbuildings. Just keep it clear of that flammable material and you might be okay. So just be mindful of your outbuildings in defensible space. And then fences. Holy moly, do we see this in the big fires, whether it was Camp or Tubbs, Cedar, Witch. Fences are freeways for fire. I worked at a commercial nursery for years and years in my younger years, in my 20s. And most of the people we got in nurseries, really a majority, probably 40 or 50%, were coming in to block their neighbors. Californians just don't like their neighbors. And so we build these dense, flammable structures in between our houses that gravely endangers them, as evidence in this picture. Both that fence and the Italian cypresses need to be replaced. They are too old and too full of fine material, and they're highly ignitable and highly combustible. So if you're working in fences in fire country, you really want to restrict the use of flammable materials if possible. So if you're only blocking your neighbor's view on your property, maybe just restrict the wood higher up so they can't look in. Or if you're just trying to block weed seeds from blowing into your property, then you maybe just need the wood on the bottom. Or if you're just creating a physical barrier, there's no reason to use wood, whereas just wire mesh would work just as well. And the picture on the bottom right is a good example. They restricted the flammable materials. They used a lot of non-flammable materials. And then their plant selection, the Texas privet, the ligustrum, is ideal in fire country. So not only is it deer proof, but it's wonderfully fire resistant. So just get creative with your fences. And again, it's all about that good maintenance, maintaining that wood and removing those fine fuels, that dead vegetation. So these are the things to do for your structures. So it's an outbuilding, shade structure, and fences is first, try to use non-flammable materials if your budget allows. Second, fill those gaps. Cannot stress that enough. It's those gaps is what causes the firebrands to stick to your structure and ignite it. So it's just good maintenance. Paint and putty are your friends in fire country. If you've got the opportunity, skirt your overhangs. So if you've got a deck that's overhanging a slope, just take some sheetrock, take it from the deck all the way to the ground, and that prevents those firebrands and that intense heat from getting up underneath the deck. If you can't afford a skirt or you just lack the time to install one, then just make sure that all the flammable vegetation 30 feet below that deck has been removed and cleared. And then lastly, clear flammable vegetation 30 feet around any structure. And pictured below is the campfire. I took this picture 1 year after that devastation. That was 19,000 structures and 86 lives. And I'm on a pad where the house is destroyed, and every house behind me in this entire track is gone except for this one house. And you can see that they had a lot of good characteristics, wonderful maintenance on their building and their deck that overhangs. They had good clearance below the deck. So flame length would have been no more than 3 to 5 feet. And it just has a lot of wonderful characteristics. If they can survive that fire, we can survive our fires. Okay, trees. This really pertains to Big Bear. Every time I've gone to Big Bear, I've been alarmed at the density of trees in your communities. Now, after the tunnel fire of 1991, the US came up with a standard for tree spacing in the urban wildland interface or fire country. And it just depended on slope. So as the slope increased, tree spacing increased as well. And this is just a national standard and definitely a standard that has been embraced in California. And these are just two good or poor examples of tree spacing. The bottom left is the Tubbs fire. And you can see that there is no tree spacing, no defensible space. There's not even 5 feet of clearance. Now, I've stared at this picture for many, many years, and something happened 11 years ago. Maybe it was a change of ownership or something, but that forest started recolonizing that landscape about 11 years ago. They have every aged tree on this property. So they have 2-year-old trees, 5-year-old trees, and 10-year-old trees. And so it's been colonizing. This has been a slow creep. And so it's been inattention for about 11 years that caused this. So it slowly builds in communities. These trees grow intensity and density over time. And the problem with that is showcased in the picture above, is that California has a boom and bust water cycle. So we go through deluges, and it causes the vegetation to rapidly resprout, respond, and reproduce. And that's great in this community because they're blocking the roadway and the noise and the pollutants from these citizens. But when we hit the drought again, you have too many plants on the landscape for that amount of available water. And when we hit that boom, that bust cycle, that drought, all of a sudden you're going to lose 1/3 of all the plants on your landscape because there's just not enough available water. And on our vegetation is common throughout the state. I have seen this everywhere. This is Malibu, and you can see the cycles of boom and bust throughout every community I visited. Proper tree spacing allows for healthy, resilient trees. It allows them to use the resources given to them more efficiently and to better effect. So proper tree spacing is not only good for fire protection, but it is great for landscape health. And these are just some examples I've worked on as a contractor up in the Sierra foothills. This is Auburn, Grass Valley, and Rough and Ready. And here we just removed trees, did a great job. We created 4-foot paths. We irrigated the first 10 feet around all these structures, trying to bring up the moisture levels. And really most of this work in these 3 properties really just involved removing trees and creating that openness. Now, I'd like to say something a little emotional or personal, is that tree spacing actually makes you feel better. Humans are animals, and when we can see into our environment great distances, we feel safe. But if we're hemmed in by dense vegetation and cannot see what's behind the vegetation, subconsciously, our anxiety levels rise up a bit because of our reptilian brain needs to know that we are safe in our environment, and our eyes provide those cues. When we properly space our trees, we ease our reptilian brain. We give our eyes the chance to see our environment and to evaluate it on potential dangers. So this is as good for emotional health as it is for physical health and fire protection. So I know it's really hard to remove a 2-year-old tree or a 4-year-old tree, but it's absolutely essential. You're doing something that fire would naturally do. So again, we're going to be fire and fire country if we want to survive. Okay, boy, I'm just running right along. Plants. Everybody loves plants, and these are my favorite slides. I love talking about this stuff. First, there's about 2,800 plants commercially available to California gardeners, and classifying all 2,800 into flammable or not is super problematic, and only a nut job would even try that. So I have learned that it's far better to evaluate a plant based on its characteristics rather than its name. So getting to know these attributes is fundamental to fire-resistant plants. So first, these are the characteristics of a less flammable plant. One, broadleaf plants are less flammable than conifers. That's a no-brainer. So the heuchera, the coral bells, pictured here, have that big leaf, far more fire resistant than the conifer and those skinny leaves. Moist and easily bent leaves are less flammable than brittle leaves. So a good example probably would be daylily or agapanthus, lily of the Nile, or even the coral bells. You can take those leaves and twist them and they won't break or tear. They're just really supple and moist. Whereas if I took a dodendea, the hop seed, and it would actually snap. So moist and easily bent leaves are less flammable. Thick leaves are less ignitable than thin leaves. So, a good example would be an aloe, big thick leaf, compared with the dodendea or the hop seed again, which has that thin, tiny leaf. Low amounts of litter, it's a no-brainer. So if your plant produces low amounts of litter, it's just going to be less of a hazard than a high litter plant. Sap that looks more like water. So like oak trees, if you cut an oak tree, its sap is just very waterous. I don't think that's a word. It's water. And opposed to any of your conifers, which produce pitch or resin. So sap that's more like water is less flammable. Plants without a fragrance. Fragrance means oil. So a lot of plants take their energy and their water and they convert it to oils for a variety of reasons, to repel pollinators, to conserve water. So a lot of Mediterranean plants are high in oils, and as a consequence, these plants are more ignitable and combustible as a consequence. So this would include lavender and rosemary. So these plants are a little more ignitable and combustible than comparable plants. And then plants with silver or gray leaves are less ignitable than green-leaved. And silver or gray, a plant gets that. So like Dusty Miller or lamb's ear is really gray. And they get that gray by pulling minerals from the soil and deposit to reflect the sunlight. So they're trying to create a mirror-like surface because they're getting more energy than they can metabolize. So plants with silver or gray leaves are less flammable. And then plants without hair. So the Fremontia, the California sycamore, they all have hairy leaves on the underside. It helps protect for water conservation, but it makes them more ignitable as a consequence. Now, when it comes to fire-resistant plants, there's actually kind of two types. There's fire retardant and fire resistant. And these two types come from Kenneth Montgomery in the LA Arboretum in the mid-1970s. He built a burn chamber at the LA Arboretum and a plant and evaluated how quick they would ignite, how much heat they would produce when ignited, and how long would they sustain the flames. And he found out some plants really didn't even produce a flame. They just kind of sizzled and wilted. These are the fire retardant plants. Then the other plants, the fire resistant plants, did produce a flame, but they were self-extinguishing. They kind of put it out. As soon as the dead wood was gone, poof, the fire was gone and it never went into the live wood. Fire retardant plants need more water. Fire resistant plants, a lot of which are natives, are co-evolved or had evolved to fire. And they're often fantastic in fire country because they rapidly respond to damage and injury and will resprout which helps with the eventual erosion post-fire. So here are just some examples. Kenneth Montgomery found out that agapanthus, the lily of the Nile, redbud, crepe myrtle, fescue, flax, gazania, grape, liquid amber, philodendron, photinia, and succulents were all fire retardant. They just kind of shrugged off that intense heat. Fire-resistant plant, these are a lot of natives, was artemisia, ceanothus, rock rose, all your oaks are fantastic, cotoneaster, all your verbenas, toyon, yarrow, all the yarrows, and then yucca were deemed to be fire-resistant. Pictured below is Santa Barbara daisy, geranium and cannon, gazania, and then the yellow swamp mimulus. And these are all lawn alternatives to help save water, and they're all fairly fire resistant. They're really good at resisting the impacts of intense heat and firebrands. But after 27 years of working in fire country, I'm just going to come out and say it: plantless are stupid. Stupid. Because every plant I just I've seen a pile of ash. And this picture summarizes it perfectly. That's Santolina and heavenly bamboo. And Santolina has gray leaves and is considered fairly fire resistant. It has a great track record. Not this plant. It is too old and is just full of fine material in its interior. And it gravely endangers this old building with super thin windows, which can transmit that heat and ignite those tissue paper-like curtains on the other side. Really, maintenance is going to determine whether or not plants play an active role in your protection. So any plant that's too old, diseased, injured, pest infested, dried, not healthy, you name it, is a liability. It doesn't make a difference what its name is. Let me just give you two more examples. When I went to the campfire, there was junipers everywhere. There was no houses, no buildings, no cars, but junipers were everywhere. They survived. And they're just so slow growing, they hadn't accumulated, or they were young enough, they hadn't accumulated that fine material, that ignitable material to create that threat that junipers can eventually become. This picture to the left, really, there's a house 7 feet, a burnout, just a pad gone 7 feet behind me. That juniper survived a fire within 13 feet of it, and it still remains. And conversely, this is the bonfire of December of last year, and the plants that you see fried and charred are all the plants I just recommended: oak, lemonade berry. It's really about maintenance. If it has fine material, dead material, it is a liability. Don't get stuck on plant lists. If I was doing an assessment of your community or your property, I would look on the condition of the plants rather than just what type of plant it is. Is it well maintained? Is it well watered? Is it loved? And is it free of the fine ignitable material? These are the attributes of a good plant. And I want to bring up Miss Bayless again from the Mountain Vision Fire. She lives under Bishop Pines. Now, I don't know if you know Bishop Pines, but they have cones, skull-crushing cones that are this big, and they only open up in fire. They are a fire-dependent pine tree, and she survived. You can too. She took meticulous care of her plants. She removed those dead branches from the trees, so the fire actually kind of burnt around her property. The fire brand she was experiencing wasn't coming from her trees, which were well loved, moderately watered, and free of that fine material. We can do this in Big Bear too. We can create a good environment. So when it comes to plants, this is nursery people really need to promote this, is remove that dead, dying, and diseased vegetation. Remove the kindling from your environment, and especially in that first 30 feet. Manage that 30 feet. Replace vegetation before it becomes an economic liability or fire risk. Gardeners are so sentimental. We'll plant a tree when our son was born. We're going to plant a tree, and then 45 years later it becomes this huge liability, but we are remiss to remove it because of our emotional connections to it. Fire doesn't have those connections. We need to be fire. So remove it remove and replant, always replant before it becomes an economic liability. And lastly, do not let your play out. We saw this in the Tubbs fire. So Northern California hit that drought a little harder than Southern California back in 2014, 15, and 16. That Russian River was dry. And as a response, cities like Santa Rosa and Healdsburg just turned off all their irrigation. So they turned off their mediums, their parkways, their front yards, their backyards. And so when that Tubbs fire came into the city borders, they hit a parched landscape. So if you're under mandatory water restrictions and you just turn off your sprinklers, it is our responsibility to remove the plants that are dependent on that irrigation, because if we do not, we welcome fire in so we either have to allocate the water for urban water use, or we have to remove the plants that are dependent on that irrigation. But do not let your plants dry out. So hope I got that across. Okay, and now the conclusion. Boy, I just roared right through this. So get dirty, get involved, and be that fire in Big Bear. First, manage those pathways. Make sure you can run around that entire structure unencumbered on 4-foot paths. Will greatly enhance your chances of survival. Landscape structures, non-flammable materials, oversized timbers, regular maintenance, and keep that ignitable vegetation from around those structures. So that would be playhouses, tree houses, tool shed, LPG tanks. All that needs flammable vegetation removed from around it. Trees, just make sure that there's good distance in between the growing tips. This will be not only as good for fire protection, but for your emotional health and plant health and landscape health as well. And then plants, remove the ignitable vegetation, remove that dead, dying, diseased, and dried vegetation. That is the kindling that allows a fire to run across the landscape. Next week, I will be covering outlying areas and how to manage wild vegetation. So I'll be looking squarely at zones 2 and 3. I'll be looking at ways to work with nature so we're not destroying habitat and biological diversity. I'll be looking at the reasons why California has such low compliance with state fire code. And it's not your fault, it's how we're built. Handling green waste. Some of you have massive properties, and to clean your property greatly increases the amount of green waste. So I'll talk about all the avenues for green waste in urban areas, and then just using equipment, how to properly use equipment in fire country so you're not the one to start the fire. So with that, thank you so much. And just one last point, this book to the bottom left is free. It was funded by a first ever collaboration by Metropolitan Water District, Southern California Gas, and Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. And it's free on Be Water Wise, by Sunset Magazine and LA Times. And it's just a wonderful guide on how to manage California-friendly landscapes and plants. So I just encourage everybody to download this free book. So, and with that, thank you so much. Oh boy, I did. I really roared right through that, didn't I? I'm gonna lay off the coffee before I do this, Sierra.
Does anybody have any questions? You can put them now in the Q&A, in the chat. You can raise your hand. We'll unmute you. I know I had a question, even though now I have to laugh at myself. I wanted that list of lawn alternative flowers that you talked about.
Yeah.
I know that they have to be properly maintained. I want to see the list. And then one of our other attendees wanted to see that last slide again, if we could.
Yes. Yeah. Last slide. Yeah. The one with the Big Bear picture, or the?
I think with the books, I imagine. And I was actually going to find the link to that and put that in the notes. Yep, the books.
Okay. Yeah, just California friendly, a maintenance guide for landscapers, gardeners, and land manager. And although I was the author, this had 14 editors. So was exceptionally well researched. So the information is solid. It's, in fact, I use it all the time, and I teach out of it at Cal Poly, and it's just been a really good resource guide. And Sierra, you may even be able to get some hard copies for your community because it covers stormwater capture, stormwater management, rain barrels, how to maintain rain barrels. It covers surfaces, how to use mulches properly, DG, gravel, manage weeds, all the strategies for managing weeds, which is a huge mandate. It covers so much neat stuff in there.
And I just put a link to that book in the chat. So for anybody who's on the webinar, you can click on and save that link, and that will open up the PDF version. I actually do have a couple of copies. I think I may have actually gotten that last time I saw you in person, Doug.
Okay.
So yeah, I don't have it for everybody, but I do keep a couple of copies here in the office. If anybody does want to come by and take a look at it sometime, just let us know. And then we also have another question. Lisa wanted to know exactly what skirting overhangs means. So what does that mean?
Oh, thank you. I should have covered that in more detail. And Lisa, that's a really good question. So if you you have a deck that overhangs a slope, so the slope's coming like this, you leave that gap right there for those firebrands and that intense heat to get held up underneath the deck. And a skirt, it can even be plywood, but mostly it's sheetrock or some non-flammable material. It's just a big piece of board that goes from the bottom of the top of the deck all the way to the ground. And it can just, it's just pounded up right along the deck, and it prevents that firebrands and that intense heat from getting up underneath the deck. So if you're in a very high fire hazard area and you're going to build a deck over a slope, it may be required by your city to skirt that feature. I know all new homes in Los Angeles County, if the home, a portion of the home extends over a slope, they have to skirt that portion of the home. So it varies. It is one of the best things to prevent fire from engulfing an overhang. It's a good question. Thank you, Lisa.
And would you say that skirting is a better option than painting the underneath or the underside of a deck?
Yes, because skirting has a longevity of 15 years, whereas if you paint, you're looking at a longevity of 3 to 5 years. And there's also the problem of ignitable material naturally accumulating under the decks, and skirting prevents that. It prevents those critters from living underneath your deck, and it prevents the accumulation of the fine materials that would naturally blow in. Even it stops the weeds from growing underneath the decks because of the lack of sunlight. You can also skirt a deck if you want with 1/8 inch wire metal mesh. And that 1/8 inch metal mesh would prevent a majority of those firebrands from penetrating the underside of that deck. But that was a good one. Yeah, I should have maybe had more pictures of that.
Anybody else have any questions? Good questions so far. Thank you, guys.
Well, I have a question for you, Sierra. So are you under the mandatory water restrictions that the governor, he asked everybody to cut 15%? Is that part of you too?
Yeah, so he asked the entire state to cut a voluntary 15%,
yeah.
But we are one of the few remaining counties who are not included in the statewide drought declaration just yet. 100% of the county is in severe drought, and I think 20%, just over 20%, 21% is in exceptional. But Southern California, oddly enough, this year has been in a lesser drought than Northern California. I can't say we're not in a drought. We're certainly in a drought. We're in one of the higher stages, but we're not in that exceptional status like most of Northern California.
Yeah, okay. I know we have a lot of stored water. So, so I could infer then it would be okay to make sure that your citizens' water, I mean, your citizens' landscapes are properly irrigated. Then it's
Yeah,
okay.
and our
Actually,
rule here,
it's okay.
yeah, our rule at the DWP is alternate day irrigation. So no more than every other day, which still gives people an opportunity to water their landscapes 3 to 4 days a week, which is more than enough. And that's one thing I think a lot of people don't know, especially when it comes to a drought. Stuff like an established tree doesn't need to be watered, even 3 or 4 times a week. You can give it a good deep watering once every week or two, and it should be sufficient. And even 3 days a week is good enough for most of the plants that survive well up here, especially.
Yeah, you have a rugged environment, and yeah, I'm sure once a week would be sufficient if you lay down enough water. But that's really good that you are encouraging some irrigation and that to maintain the health of the landscape, because really when urban communities dry, you can see that fire creep in further and further into the urban centers. But when we can put up that wall of vegetation that's really well maintained, you see
Right.
those firebrands drop.
Yeah.
So,
And that's something we encourage is if people are having trouble, maintaining their lawn, or maybe they just don't use it enough, just cut back what they don't need. It's not that you necessarily even have to remove the entire lawn, but just remove what you don't need, which may be that portion that's further away. Maybe you want to keep that lawn that's close to your house to be that kind of green live border to serve as a little bit of a protection zone, but remove something that's further out that you're not using, you're not maintaining. Maybe you do have a problem with gophers or it's dying, or something along those lines. And another thing I wanted to remind people, this is not super high, but rain barrels. We do have a rain barrel rebate program. We have rebates and free rain barrels. So if you are a City of Big Bear Lake DWP customer, you can contact us, fill out an application. We give away free rain barrels. They come in both terracotta and black. We've got 50 and 55 gallons. If those don't suit your stylistic needs, you can also apply for a rain barrel rebate. We do a rebate of up to $50 per rain barrel. And you can get 3 or 4 rain barrels and just have us rebate a portion of that cost. And that always serves as a backup water supply. So for me in my house, for example, I live on the outskirts, and we are reliant on hauled water and the power being on, right, in order to be able to access that water.
right.
And so I've got rain barrels on every corner of my garage, every corner of my house. And I figure if nothing else, even though it's gravity flow, that does give a firefighter or somebody just that extra little bit of water that's easily accessible in addition to what's in our tank to try to, if nothing else, wet the landscape or do something. Yeah.
Oh, smart. It's just percentages, right? Fire protection is just, you're accumulating these attributes that save you. And it's just one small thing after a next accumulates to a saved property. So way to go, Sierra. That sounds great.
After our last session last month, I went around and did the 5-foot rule, and I was pulling everything away from my house for 5 feet. So little by little, getting things done.
Okay, I'm coming to your house I'm coming to your house in a conflagration. You're going to be ready. Okay, everybody to Sierra's. Woo!
Anybody else have any questions? I don't see any questions in the chat or the Q&A. I know we went a little quick today, but I hope that this has all been helpful. And again, if anybody has any questions afterwards, you think, oh no, I forgot to ask that, please do email us. Feel free and register for the rest of our sessions. We've still got 5 sessions left. We've got next week, we're going to have Laura Allen going through the laundry to landscape gray water system that does not require a permit as long as you follow all the regulations essentially. And then next month we'll have, or actually at the end of this month, we'll have Orchid Black again talking about rain gardens and swales, that session that we missed last week. So she's going to be doing that on August 25th. And then we've got Orchid the following week, September 1st, again coming back. And then we'll have Doug the second week of September and Laura Allen on how to save your trees during a drought for that 3rd week of September. Thank you again for Doug for joining us today. I found it especially helpful again. I took lots and lots of notes. So if anybody's like, oh, I missed something, let me know. I'd be happy to get that to you.
And this will be available, right? So they can go and watch it with their family or community members.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to post this on our YouTube channel. If you are registered, you will also get a link after this session is closed. So you'll get a link where you can go back and watch this online. And if at any point, because at some point we run out of cloud storage, if you miss it there, it gets posted on our YouTube channel.
Okay. Yeah.
And we'll share that on our Facebook page as well. Thank you. Thank you again.
Oh, well, I'm gonna go out and get some decaf and slow down for next month.
There you go. And Lisa said thank you as well in the Q&A. Thank you, Lisa.
Thanks, Lisa.
All right, you guys have a great day.
Okay, bye.